joined.
Okay. Oh, there he is. Okay.
Well, are we ready to start then?
Yes.
All right. Well, I'd like to call this meeting of the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Utilities Commission Finance Committee to order. And as my first order of business, I want to thank everybody for being on the call and all the viewers on YouTube out there. Particularly thankful for the staff and their great work throughout all of this. You guys have been doing wonderful. You've been adapting quite well to where we are, and from the information you've sent out already, it looks like you guys have been hard at work. So really appreciate all that. And with that, Courtney, I will do what any smart commissioner would do and turn the meeting back over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Ruffin. I really appreciate that. First, we'll let Patrice call the roll.
Okay. Good afternoon, commissioners. I'm going to start with the Finance Committee. The Commissioner Chairman for the Finance Committee, James Ruffin.
Here.
Commissioner Tom Griffin.
Present.
Commissioner Hugh Jernigan. Commissioner Jernigan, are you there?
Yes, are you picking me up?
Yes, I have now.
Right.
Commissioner Chris Parker.
Present.
Commissioner Alan Younger.
I'm present.
Okay, and then I'll finish with the rest of the commissioners. It's Commissioner Harold Day.
Present.
Commissioner Yvonne Hines. Commissioner Donald Stewart. Commissioner Wesley Curtis.
Present.
Commissioner Dwayne Long.
Present.
I'll go back. Is Commissioner Yvonne Hines there? Commissioner Donald Stewart, are you there? Okay, thank you.
Don't forget Chairman, overall Chair, Mr. Tuttle.
Patrice.
Oh, he is here. I'm sorry. Commissioner Tuttle, I'm sorry. Overall.
Present.
No. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm done with the roll. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So we'll go ahead and get started, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. So let me get it in. Can everybody see the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I hope you and your families are doing well. Today we're going to go over the operating budget. Before we really dive into the details, I want to give some updates to our impacts and challenges of the COVID-19 crisis. So first, we've made changes to our operations. We have employees that are working from home. We have implemented staggered shifts and schedules. Employees that have to come to their work sites more than 50% of the time are considered essential personnel and are receiving a 5% premium pay. Governor Cooper's executive order was issued on March 31st of this year. It's effective for 60 days. It prohibits termination of service for non-payment. It prohibits billing or collecting of late fees and penalties. And it mandates that we give at least a 6-month payment plan for customers to be able to pay any outstanding balances that they accumulate. We feel like this is obviously going to lead into a rise in our delinquency rate. We also anticipate a reduction in water consumption from the stay-at-home orders. We feel that residential consumption will increase, but that will be offset by a decrease in commercial and governmental accounts. The city of Winston-Salem stopped their yard waste collection, curbside collection. And so as a result of that, we have implemented free yard waste disposal for Winston-Salem residents that we'll continue to do until yard waste collection begins again. The recommendation that we're going to present to you today does not include a rate increase for water, sewer, or solid waste. We're trying to be sensitive to the economic issues that our community and our customers are facing. I've also had calls and conversations with other utility directors across the state, and the majority of the utilities are taking the same approach, where if they had planned a rate increase this year, which most of them did have one planned, they are not moving forward with the rate increase. We are increasing scrutiny on operational spending. I have given a directive to our division heads to monitor closely any spending, just to make sure that we're keeping an eye on that. We have made reductions in our FY21, this upcoming budget year operating budget request. We'll go over that in more detail, but we have dialed that back. And then also, until we have a better idea of what kind of revenue impact or financial impact we might have, we're delaying or reducing the scope of some pending capital projects, and I'll also go into a little bit more detail about that in just a few slides. Are there any questions about any of these challenges or issues that we're seeing?
Courtney, I had a question.
Yes.
It's Chris. I noticed that they were going to start the yard cart pickups on May 4th. I think they still are not going to be doing the branchy pickups, the larger item pickups. So I'm wondering, have we seen an increase in people actually bringing their own stuff to the landfill?
Yeah, so I'll let Damon and Jan can also chime in, so maybe unmute yourself. But I will say that we have been extremely busy at our yard waste facilities and the landfill. We've had lines, and obviously a lot of people are staying home now, and so they have time to clean out their house, and we have seen definitely an increased number of trips to the landfill and the yard waste facilities.
Okay, well, I would imagine that might start cutting down now that they're at least picking the carts up. But we'll continue to offer it. We'll continue to offer up until they pick up the branches on the sidewalks and everything else. That's the plan.
Yes, I'll be coordinating with Damon, but that is the plan until we start the collection again. We'll continue to allow residents to bring yard waste for free. If they meet certain restrictions, we do have limitations. They have to be in a small truck or an 8-foot trailer. There's certain restrictions that we have. Are there any other questions? Okay. With that, we'll go on. So today we're going to go over the capital improvement plan that was presented at the April 13th meeting. We'll just go over a brief overview to see if anybody has any questions. Then we'll go over our budget refresher. Jan will give the solid waste budget request presentation. Mike Quivisto will give the water and wastewater budget request presentation, and then just real quickly follow up with next steps. So you've seen this table before. This is the budget year requested appropriations, as well as this 6-year planning window for solid waste. This budget year, we are requesting $1,676,060 to fund 3 capital projects for solid waste. A similar table for water and wastewater. This budget year, this upcoming budget year, we are requesting $38.5 million in appropriations to fund a total of 15 water and wastewater projects. I wanted to show you the last 10 years budget request for water and wastewater, since it is the larger of the budget request, the capital request. Over the last 10 years, this upcoming budget year, so fiscal year 21, it's the second lowest year in the last 10 years. So we're asking $38.5 million. it follows a $29.5 million request in FY14. Over the last 10 years, we've had some pretty large budget appropriations requested, and you can see there's a footnote at the bottom of the slide that shows that we asked for $99 million in FY15 for the South Fork Critical Improvement Program. The Muddy Creek Wastewater Treatment Plant project that's currently ongoing was part of that program. And we're also asked for $30 million for advanced metering infrastructure and $55 million for the Nelson Water Treatment Plant upgrade in previous years. Just a reminder, we showed this in our capital presentation, but this is an example project of the difference between appropriations versus spending. The appropriations show up in orange and in blue, and then the project spending is the line shown in green. In July of 2018, we requested appropriations of $55 million for this one particular project, in addition to some previously approved appropriations. And we asked for a large amount of appropriations up front so we can issue construction contracts to vendors. And then we do not spend that all in 1 year. It takes several years, in this case, 3.5 years to spend that money down. A good example of that, as I just mentioned, our Muddy Creek Wastewater Treatment Project that we appropriated funds in the past, we're still spending on that project several years later. The question that came up in our April 13th meeting was there are several active projects that are not showing up in the CIP in the capital request. So I wanted to show you a few of those. And the reason for that is because if we have already fully funded, or we've asked for the adequate amount of appropriations for a project, we do not it does not show back up in the capital budget request because the appropriations have already been approved to fund that project. So a few on the water and wastewater side, the AMI project has already been fully funded by appropriations. Nelson Water Treatment Plant Modernization Project, and then the South Fork Critical Improvement Program, which includes the Muddy Creek Wastewater Treatment Plant and the Kerner's Mill Lift Station. Solid Waste Continuum Projects, the EVO Property Access and Road Development, and then Phase 3 South 6 Development. So these are still projects that we are actively spending money on, but they won't show up in our CIP request because they've already been fully funded. The appropriations have already been approved that's needed for those projects. Any questions on that? Okay. I mentioned earlier that we're putting a few capital projects on hold or either delaying them or reducing the scope. So I just wanted to briefly go over those projects that we're looking at. The CSIP, our Collection System Improvement Program, the Year 5 contract, we are looking to delay the award of that to August or September timeframe. There's 2 sewer rehabilitation projects that we were going to move forward with. We're going to put those on hold. The Kernersville one, we need to continue moving forward with a piece of that. So what we want to do is reduce the contract amount. And this is just an estimate because we have to bid that project, but $7.5 million to $4 million to keep that going. There's some work that needs to be done. Under water distribution system improvements, there's the water service line renewal, valve condition assessment, and cross connection control survey that we are going to wait a few months on. Meter shop and administration renovations, we are continuing with the design of those facilities. However, we will not bid those projects until a few months and we have a better idea of what the financial impact will be to the utility. The Nelson Water Treatment Plant Modernization Project, we received bids on that in late March, early April. I can't remember the exact date. The bid came in very high, much higher than our current budget. So we're looking at options to, break that contract up into multiple stages. We could potentially monitor the construction market and see if construction prices drop any because of the economic situation. Possibly look at maybe rebidding that project as is. But whatever option we go with, we're going to wait a few months to get a better idea of what's going on before we do anything else with that project. The AMI project, we had scheduled to bring a pretty large contract to the Utility Commission in June. We estimated it to be about $45 million. The AMI project is one that we really don't want to lose momentum on. We want to keep moving forward with it. So we're looking at reducing the initial contract to something around the $5 million range and potentially still bringing that in June. We just want to move forward with that. Obviously there would have been a lot of benefits to having the AMI system in place right now. So we really want to keep that moving as much as possible. Any questions on any of those?
Yeah, Courtney, just a quick question on AMI, for example, which is this is more of an overall question, but specifically on AMI, you just said it sure would be nice to have already had that in place with all that we have going on here. Are there things like that and others that we're putting on hold that would probably be better off in the long run to go ahead and do and could probably do if there was more certainty in the future?
Well, and that's a great question, because anything that we put on hold now, if we put on hold any kind of budget requests for our operations budget, if we put on hold any capital projects, we're not eliminating those projects, we're delaying them. That means we're going to have to play catch up, and we're going to have to do that in future years. So right now, what we want to do is wait just a few months, just to see how things shake out. We will move forward with what's necessary. That's why some of the projects were just reducing scope, and hopefully we have a better idea in a few months on how to proceed, and we can keep moving. But you're right. I mean, AMI. There's some things that we definitely want to keep moving forward with, and all of our current projects that are already underway. Of course, we're keeping those are moving forward. We just wanted to see how things. We want to have a better idea before we start asking you to approve large sums of money.
Well, thanks. That's helpful. And I appreciate y'all's thought throughout all of this. Just want to make sure that we're not doing something that will, in the long run, cost us more money and more problems than if we just went ahead and did it now, if we have the funds to do it.
Right.
But I know you guys have looked at it through that lens, so I appreciate that. That helps my question. And you may get to this later, but the thing that I keep thinking about is, we've been cleaning the sewer lines and catching up on getting those cleaned up and all that. Has that been affected by this at all? Sorry if I got out of sequence here, but that's been on my mind.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And Mike Stover is on the line, and he can chime in also. But yes, we have seen SSO, sanitary sewer overflows that have been caused by, people flushing things that they shouldn't be, so wipes and things of that nature. We are trying to market that and put that out there as much as we can. Gail gave an interview, I believe, yesterday with the Journal. So we're monitoring that, and we really don't want to get behind on our cleaning efforts for that very reason.
So we're not doing anything other than what we were planning on doing to begin with then on that.
Right. We're moving forward with that. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Courtney, I've got a question.
Yes.
Yeah. Going back to AMI, back when we initially approved this, we were talking about $50 million, and now we're talking about a bigger number, of course. But back then, very specifically, this cost justified. With a bigger number, if it got to 100 million, does this still cost justify as a project?
So AMI, we still think will be around 50 million. Nielsen is the one that's, you know, the bid came in closer to 100 million. And we still have issues that we need to address at Nielsen. So yes, we do need to move forward with that one. But the AMI project,
to
yes, the cost still justifies, the benefits from AMI, the costs are justified, yes.
Is there a cost at which it will no longer justify? In other words, do you have a break point that where it would no longer be cost justifiable?
Yes, there could be, but we're not near that. We're not anywhere
Okay.
near that.
Okay, that's enough for me.
Right. That answers your question. Okay, good. That's good. I will say Lisa's gonna talk a little bit later, and I don't want to steal her thunder, but we are in a financial position. You know, we've done things in the past, and you know, we've worked really hard to get our debt coverage ratio up, and have cash on hand, and we've had rate increases in the past that we are in a good financial position to take a bad year, to absorb not as good a year as we have had in the past. But she'll go into those details and hopefully make you feel better about our financial position shortly. Okay. Are there any other questions as far as the capital goes? Okay. I'm going to give just a brief budget refresher. That's what we're calling it. Since we don't really dive into the details about the budget, but once a year, I wanted to go over some of the key pieces that make up the budget. So our budget really has two parts to it. We have the capital, which we just briefly discussed, and then we have the operating budget. The operating budget pays for ongoing expenses such as personnel, supplies and services, and debt service. And it's supported by revenues from fees. So on the water and sewer side, that's volumetric charges and readiness to serve charge, which is formerly known as our base charge. On the landfill side, it's primarily supported by the tipping fees that we collect. General fund versus enterprise fund. General fund departments are funded through property taxes, state and local sales taxes, and user fees. You can see from the slide a few of the departments, the City of Winston-Salem departments that are general fund departments. The enterprise funds are funded through charges for services. Water and wastewater is an enterprise fund, and then solid waste is its own enterprise fund. Those are state statutes that you have to set up those services under what's called an enterprise fund. So it's not supported by your taxes. Any questions on that before I turn it over to Jan, and she'll present the operations budget for solid waste? Okay, hearing none, Jan's got control. Jan, tell me if you have any issues.
I think I've got it. Thank you very much, Courtney, and good afternoon, everyone. Courtney mentioned that we have made some revisions to our budget throughout the spring in response to what's going on in the world today. So we wanted to start out by showing you the evolution of the budget since our initial request was prepared in February. So in the far left of this table, you see the current year adopted budget, just over $10.5 million there for these items. And then in the next couple of columns, the initial request that we made in February. So that constituted a 3%, just over a 3% increase over the current year's budget. Then on April 1st, some other revisions were made. The pay increases for employees and overtime, additional overtime was removed from the budget. So that took the increase down to a 2.6% increase over the current year. Then later in April, just as recently as last week, we made some additional reductions in contracted services and removed a vehicle replacement from the budget and brought it down to 1.78% increase over the current year. So when you add in the debt service that we have to pay, the payments we make on our indebtedness, bond indebtedness, the total budget that we're going to discuss today is $11,539,480, just under a 1% increase over the current year's budget. So there you see the broad categories of the total budget of 11.5 million. The largest component of it being supplies and services, which are budgeted just over $6 million. That's a 2.9% increase. Personnel is budgeted just over $2.5 million. That's a 2.6% increase. Debt service is $1.95 million, just over that, 7.9% decrease there. And the countywide recycling programs are budgeted at just over $1 million at a 4.25% increase. So we'll talk a little bit about each one of those categories of expenditures. Personnel is budgeted at $2.5 million, which is a 2.6% increase. Benefits increase in benefits costs and the retirement system costs make up about half of that increase. There's a small increase in overtime that we've requested, and salaries increased by almost 2%. Supplies and services, and this includes the recycling budgets on this slide, are budgeted at $7,083,620, which is just over a 3% increase. The biggest part of that is in contracted services. This includes money to crush and recycle concrete on site, freon extraction for our appliances, credit card fees, and some other miscellaneous contracted services. Interdepartmental charges by other city departments increased by $52,850, which is about a 9% increase. And this is information services and indirect cost allocations. Household hazardous waste and recycling, that's a contracted service that is increasing by $41,000 or about 4.3%. We'll talk more about that in another slide. Equipment maintenance is maintenance and repair on our fleet of heavy equipment. That's increasing by $25,000 in this budget. Closure accruals, this is the money. Can you guys hear me okay? I'm hearing a lot of static. Closure accruals are the money that we set aside to close the landfill in the future and to care for it after closure. That increases by 1.2%. And this is directly related to an increase in tonnage at our facilities, at our landfills. Permit fees increase slightly in this budget based on the actual costs that we're seeing. And temporary labor costs are decreasing slightly. So those two last items basically offset each other. Because supplies and services make up a large part of the budget, we wanted to show you what the actual expenditures have trended like over the last few years. So this chart shows 6 years of actual expenses in the green, and the blue are the budgeted expenses. So on the right, you see a projection for the current year that we're in. But it's important to note on this that last fiscal year, FY19, we came very close to spending out our budget. A lot of this was beyond our control. We saw record levels of incoming waste and had increases in contracted expenses and operational expenses that made us recognize the need to increase the budget to adapt to that trend. So moving on to countywide recycling programs. These are budgeted at $1,010,850. That's an increase of 4.25%. Almost all of which is, or most of which is made up of electronics recycling cost increases. We're seeing rising costs there for televisions primarily. Household hazardous waste other than electronics is not trending up, so we did not request an increase in that budget. And there are only slight increases in the drop-off recycling and schools recycling programs. And just as a reminder, the drop-off program and the schools program are paid for in full by Forsyth County, pursuant to the interlocal agreement that we have with them. Household hazardous waste, as you might remember, is paid for in equal parts by the water, wastewater, and stormwater enterprise funds. And electronics recycling is paid for by the solid waste fund. Debt service is budgeted at 1.95 million roughly, and that's a decrease of 7.9% compared to the current year's budget. The payments on our debt service are budgeted at $826,100, which is a decrease of 8.6%. The North Carolina Municipal Leasing Corporation is the financing agency through the city that we use to purchase heavy equipment and rolling stock. And that's budgeted at $1,121,720, decrease of 7.3% there. We've got two pieces of equipment to replace in the coming year's budget. One of them is a roll-off truck. This is the truck that pulls the cans from the convenience area at the front of the landfill back to the working phase. So it's an essential piece of equipment. It's in constant use 6 days a week. Budgeted at $209,000 to replace that. And also a large excavator at Old Salisbury Road landfill is nearing 20 years old and ready for replacement. That's budgeted at $557,000. And we did remove replacement of a sport utility vehicle at Haynes landfill from this budget. So those are all of the expenditures that are proposed in this budget. This slide shows you a summary of those grouped into those broad categories like you saw in the beginning. Again, the total budget is $11,539,480, which is an increase of 0.96% over the current year. So I'll just pause for a moment and see if I've got a couple more slides on revenues, but if anyone has questions about expenses, we could maybe do those now.
Losing on that.
Sorry, I didn't catch. I caught the last couple words.
On the individuals coming in with pickups and dumping for free, how much is that costing us? Have we kept up with that tonnage or what?
You know, we've been so busy, we've hardly had time to come up for air, but we are tracking the additional trips. And what I was planning to do is bring you some detailed information at the May meeting, if that'll be okay. But we're definitely seeing a big increase in the number of customer trips. Not so much the big trucks that are easier for us to service, but individuals, homeowners that are self-hauling.
Another question, over on MLK, the recycle place, I noticed, are they open now or any, or do you know?
They're not open, and I meant to mention that. Thank you. They did close, coincident with the mayor's order to stay at home. They closed that facility, and so we're seeing decreased expenses there in the current year. But when they reopen, there's likely to be a pent-up demand that everything will come in at once, and some of that could get pushed into next fiscal year. So if our expenses are reduced this year, they'll likely catch up and potentially go over budget next year. But they are closed, and we'll keep you informed as to a schedule to reopen.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just, are you full or near full staffing?
We have several people that are out intermittently with childcare conflicts. So they're coming in as much as they can, and we're trying to be as flexible as we can, but we're definitely short-staffed.
Okay.
I got to say, I think our staff has done an amazing job under difficult circumstances. I'm really proud of everyone. Anything else before I move on? You can certainly ask later too, but. Solid waste revenues are budgeted at $13,622,810, and that's a 6.5% increase over the current year. We budgeted kind of on the low side in the current year, which is why that is showing an increase there. We're actually budgeting at a lower rate of incoming tonnage than what we're seeing in the current year, but it does show an increase because we're always talking about year-over-year increases in the budget. So the largest part of that number is made up by tipping fees. As Courtney pointed out, it's about 11.7 million in this budget. That's an increase of 7.6%. Intergovernmental revenues include proceeds from the state tire tax and the solid waste disposal fund or disposal tax, that the portion that comes back to the cities and counties. We're seeing that trend upward by about 2.5%. Resource recovery is the revenue that we get from the sale of recyclables, landfill gas, and scrap metal. And we're requesting a decrease in that budget to reflect the poor commodity markets for recyclables that we're seeing. Just not seeing any revenue at all from the drop-off recycling sites. So we've reduced that by almost 10%. And the transfer in from Forsyth County that you see in the next bubble, that increases in almost corresponding amount because they, by agreement, will pick up that extra cost. They pay the net cost of those programs. So as the revenues go down, their transfer in will go up accordingly. And we budgeted this way with their knowledge and confirmation because they agree that the revenues just aren't there. The rest of that transfer in is the transfer for household hazardous waste from the water, sewer, and stormwater funds. And some other revenue, miscellaneous revenue like rental income, is reduced in this budget because that's been trending downward over the last few years. So lastly, we wanted to remind you that each year we update our cost of service study and review our rates and make recommendations accordingly. And this is a study that takes the total cost of our solid waste budget and allocates it out by each facility, program, or service area. And it gives us a life cycle cost on a per ton basis that we can use to look at fees and adjust them accordingly. Based on that, we could have justified a $1 per ton increase at Old Salisbury Road landfill, but due to the economic situation that's likely to be coming worldwide and the competitive marketplace that we still work in, we're choosing not to recommend an increase there. So the numbers you see at the bottom of the slide are the current rates, and they will be the recommended rates for next year as well. There is another $2 per ton added to those figures for the 2 landfills for the solid waste disposal tax that we collect on behalf of the state. But that does not apply to the yard waste facilities. Let's see, I think that's all the information we had to present on the solid waste budget. So are there any additional questions?
Hey, Jan, I've got a question if you don't mind.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Yeah, so,
I think so.
Looking at the overall, basically the income statement, I just want to confirm my understanding is that we think we're going to have county debt service, 11.5 million of expenses, but 13, say, and a half in revenue. So that means we'll have quote unquote profit or contributions to the capital reserve of about $2 million.
That's correct.
So last fiscal year is 5 million. We estimate this fiscal year is 3 million, but we'll still, I guess I'm complimenting you and your team because even with a flat increase and a lot of challenges, we can still contribute 2 million either as pay-go or to the capital reserve. Just want to make sure I understand that.
Yes, yeah, you definitely are understanding what we have in the budget. Certainly, we're hopeful that we will make those revenues. we should point out, I guess, that the budget is prepared earlier in the year, and we have not adjusted these revenues downward. As you will hear in the near future about the water and sewer rates, they made some adjustments downward. So it is possible that if there's a very severe economic downturn, that these revenues won't materialize. So that is a possibility, and we'll be closely monitoring our spending over the next year, even more closely than we would typically, to make sure that we're not coming close.
Karina, you're okay, baby.
So if I look at, again, the same statement, 2 million of capital reserve is roughly, round numbers, say 20% of our TIP revenue. So we would have to have volume fall by 20% to get at risk of a break even.
Yes, I agree with that.
Cool.
Yes.
Okay, good. And so then obviously we can monitor through the year and make adjustments accordingly. But thank you. No, that feels good to have. And the same thing on the water and wastewater, as we'll see, or that feels good to have that kind of cushion, if I may use that word.
Right. Yes, I agree with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jan, I wanted to ask, how bad is that the lines at Haynes Mill Road?
They've been pretty bad. On Saturdays in particular, when we're only open until noon, it is all the way out the gate and back up towards 52. So yes, it has been extremely busy. We did a public relations piece. Gail Kettler, our public information officer, helped us with an interview with Channel 12, where we told people to be aware that we have increased traffic and that they could experience long lines. So we've tried to get that word out on Twitter and YouTube and those places, but it was still pretty busy this past Saturday.
Yeah, I was we had a meeting for a solid waste group the other day, and there's people across the state, and everybody is getting really heavy traffic at the landfills, and actually their tonnage is increasing of about, I mean, it's a lot of small vehicles, and even with that, small vehicles, their tonnage is increasing about 10%.
Yeah, it's amazing. Mecklenburg County has seen about a 75% increase, they told me, in customer trips, and Wake County is way up as well.
You know, also I noticed just driving down the street, you can see trucks that are filled with things that they're ready to go. It's just finding the right time to go. So at some point it's going to really flood in.
Yeah. It has been really challenging. We appreciate everyone's patience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, then I'll give it to Mike.
Okay, I've given up control. Thank you.
All right, Jan, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to turn our attention to the water and wastewater operations budget request. So a similar slide to what Jan showed earlier, we went through a couple iterations of our budget request. Here you can see personnel, supplies, and equipment leases. Those are some of the primary expense categories that we have some sort of control over in our budget. Our initial request was $53.2 million on February 26th, which was a 5.81% request. Went back with the budget office. They took out the 2% average merit increase for employees. We made some additional reductions on April 1st and got our budget down to the increase to 4.1%. Then seeing how things were trending, we did some additional adjustments and took out some increases to contracts and a few other minor adjustments to get our budget request down to $51.7 million for personnel, supplies, and equipment, which is a 2.8% increase. When you bring in the debt service and transfers, those those costs remain stagnant across the requests. So overall, our total budget request increase is, or the total budget request is 92.6 million, a 0.43% overall increase. Go through what that entails here. Our personnel budget is 23.3 million, supplies and services 27.1, transfers 464,000, and debt service 41.6 million. Once again, you see the 92.6 and the 0.43% increase. We'll go into each of those individual categories here, starting with personnel. Full-time salaries are up 1.47%. That includes 3 new additional positions for the cross-connection control program, which we began in the current year, FY20, due to the state-mandated regulation changes. That allows us to continue to ramp up that program to support it operationally and administratively. Overtime, the budget office put in a 2% increase for overtime this year, and our benefits are up 250,000 or so, 3.89%, which, as Jan mentioned, the North Carolina Local Government Employees Retirement System contribution is increased, as well as some health care benefits costs. Turning our attention to our supplies and services budget, just to show the historical trend since FY14, this blue line here is our budgeted amount, and the green line is what we spent. See here in FY17, we actually overspent our supplies and services budget, and we did it again in FY19. So we used some funds from our personnel to cover those. We've increased the budget for FY20, and you can see where we're projected to spend during the current year. So supplies and services for FY21 are budgeted at $27.1 million, which is a $935,910 increase, or 3.57%, which is made up of an increase to contractual services. That is additional paving, in addition to our paving contract for street cut repairs. The city streets department had been doing those for us, and so we're reducing that budget by that same amount, and we're going to rely on the contract, which we think is going to get the repairs done more efficiently and in a timely manner. Information and communication, that is this $243,500 is from the city's information systems department, where they're going to be replacing or upgrading a few major systems that support us in FY21. Our indirect, I want to take note of this, our indirect cost allocation is down about $9,000. And last year, this number was up almost $500,000. So just wanted to highlight that we actually have a small decrease this year. The largest area with an increase in our supplies and services budget is in our what we call our operating supplies and expenses, and that includes electrical costs at the water treatment plants are going up, as well as chemicals, credit card processing fees, and also the materials that we use to backfill. There's an increase for materials that we use to backfill our street cuts. And other expenses are up just under $45,000. That includes natural gas and some increased charges from the city's fleet services department. Our transfers are, there are no change, as Jan noted, with the household hazardous waste. That's what our transfer is to the solid waste fund. We pay 2/3 of the household hazardous waste contract. No change to that contract, and there's no change to our support to the general fund, which is around $86,000 for a safety position and for rodent control in areas that may have that need that around the sewer lines. Our debt service budget is budgeted at $41.6 million for FY21, which is just over $1 million in decrease for 2.4%. Our bonded debt is down $1.2 million, or or 3.5% due to a refinancing that we had mentioned that we did in FY20. State loans are up $200,000 to pay for the projects that we have received state loans for. And our equipment lease payments are down slightly, 1.42%, but that does include an increase. We are replacing 4 pieces of equipment, which we'll hit on here. Next, just to show you all, we haven't shown you all this slide before, but our divisions requested 17 pieces of equipment. These items were all recommended by the city's fleet maintenance division and met the replacement requirements in the city's vehicle maintenance policy. The total there was $1.3 million, and our lease payment was going to be $263,400. We were not going to be able to do all that, so we pared that down to these 10 highlighted in black with our initial request. Then when we went back on April 21st, we pared that back even further to these 4, vehicle and equipment pieces for utilities field operations. So the overall water and sewer requested expenditure summary, you can see our personnel, supplies, and services, the percentage changes there, and our total of $92,559,540 and a 0.43% overall increase. Any questions on the expenditure side of the water and sewer budget? Okay, keep going. Wanted to turn our attention to the revenue side. Yes.
Mike, hold on just a second.
Okay.
Mike Stover, if you can unmute Mr. Day, it looks like he's.
Okay.
Back on the credit card charges on that one slide. What does that entail? What are we paying credit card charges for?
We're basically, it's the credit card companies. We are paying the fees to the credit card companies when we process a credit card payment for a customer, and that has continued to increase. We've seen an increase in the number of folks paying by credit card.
Well, you know, we're legally can charge 3% now on that.
And we have not ever made a determination to pass that cost along. So at least I don't know if you want to talk about that from your perspective.
Well, we do it here. We started doing it because it got out of hand. So it's something we might want to consider as utilities, is start charging somebody who wants to do it on a credit card.
Agreed. And we have talked about it. We would need to circle back with Lisa Saunders just to address that, and we can.
I think you should. Yeah, it's a it's a lot of money at the end of the day.
Yes. Any other questions? Okay. I wanted to give a little bit of perspective and history on, before we talk about our revenues for FY20 and 21, looking at our water production and our billed consumption. The blue lines here is what we have produced at our water plants over the past 7 years. And the orangish brownish line here is what we have, what we've billed our customers. So if you can see, and here's the 5-year average on the far right, what we've produced and what we have billed has been very, very consistent over that time frame. And so just to give you all some perspective, is what we're looking at when we're heading into FY21, where we may see a decrease in consumption due to the COVID-19 pandemic impacts. So water production for the current year, based on a 5-year, the 5-year average. The 5-year average is here in the blue. The current year monthly production is in red. You can see here that the first 4 months of the year we were higher. Our water production was higher than the 5-year average. The next 4 months we were slightly below. March we were right on it. April we may be tracking a little bit lower. As of right now, it looks to be slightly lower, but we do see variations from year to year, from month to month, based on the amount of precipitation, the temperature, those types of things. So nothing for April that seems very much out of the ordinary, but we are still anticipating. Yes.
Excuse me, at a high level, what % are our revenues residential versus commercial? Thinking that the latter is going to be down, but possibly residential up during those 2-month periods.
On the consumption side of things, our revenue, our residential, 47% of our consumption comes from residential customers, and about 51% of our revenue. And then on commercial side, it's actually commercial, the consumption percentage on the consumption percentage is 34%, and the revenue is about 34%. Industrial, just for context, is where our consumption is at 16%, but our revenue is at 12%, because they're typically paying in the tier that has the lower rate.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Certainly. So we're anticipating a slight decrease in consumption in May and June, based on just what we've talked to from other utilities around the state, just to be conservative. So just for where we are in the current year from a revenue perspective through March. So, well, let me just start with, we budgeted about $120 million in revenue, just slightly over $120 million. Through March, we were at $89.4 million. We think that number will start to drop off. You know, that's an average of about $10 million a month, and we feel like that's going to drop off a little bit over the next 3 months. And that's what we're projecting for revenues for the end of this is the current year, FY20, how we're projecting our operating revenues to end up. On the water side, we budgeted $56.2 million. We think we're going to get 54.9, almost 55, which would be about 1.2 million less than we budgeted. On the sewer side, about 855,000 less than we budgeted. The big number here, system development fees, we budgeted fairly aggressively. I would say we budgeted $5 million. We're projecting to get about $2 million. We based that on some previous years, tried to translate what we'd seen from development from previous years, and into a system development fee revenue for FY20. We saw a run on development at the end of the last fiscal year while the system development fees were lower. We're thinking that maybe we would get a rebound in the second half of FY20. Have not seen that, and so we're going to come up short on system development fees for FY20. On the late fees and penalties, as Courtney mentioned, we're no longer allowed to charge those right now due to the Governor Cooper's executive order. We had already collected $2 million of our $2.3 million that we budgeted. We've got a shortfall. We're budgeting or anticipating about a $300,000 shortfall there. Our other revenues, which is new connections, lease payments for cell carriers on our tanks, et cetera, are looking okay for this year. And our transfer from stormwater we will anticipate getting that full amount. So bottom line, we budgeted $120 million, and we're coming in right around 115, and with a shortfall of potentially $5.1 million from budget to actuals for FY20. I'm hoping that this is a conservative number, but that's how it looks like it's shaken out right now. So let me show you what we're anticipating for FY21 based on some of those same assumptions and what we're seeing. So we're budgeting a 4% decrease in water revenue and a 3.5% decrease in sewer revenue. Those are primarily for commercial, a reduction in commercial consumption and a reduction in governmental consumption, which the school system falls under that, not knowing when they're going to go back to school or what's going to happen there. But we believe these estimates are conservative. we're going to go with just $2 million for system development fees for FY21. Industrial waste surcharge, which is what our industrial customers have to pay to treat waste that has additional chemicals and pollutants. We anticipate that revenue stream will stay the same. We are not going to budget any late fees or penalties. As we mentioned, the governor is not, we're not authorized to collect those, charge those or collect those right now. We don't have any visibility as to when we will regain that ability, and thought it wise just to budget no revenue from that stream for FY21. Leaving the other revenue budgeted where we think it will come in FY20. Transfer stays the same. It's overall a 7.67% decrease in revenue from the FY20 budget. And Lisa is going to talk here briefly about some of what the impact of that is on our financial model. So just to wrap things up, for big picture for the water and sewer budget, this is the FY21 budget here on the far right. Our expenditures are $92.5 million. Our total budget revenues are $111 million. We've got $18.5 million going into our capital reserve. How does that stack up against how we budgeted and what we've actually collected or seen in previous years? For FY18-19, we actually contributed $26.5 million to our capital reserve. Now that number does include $7 million in investment income. So that's part of why that number is so high. Our adopted budget for 20, we were anticipating contributing $29.7 million to our capital reserve. And now we're estimating it's going to be about $25 million. So this is the money that we've primarily been setting aside for PAYGO. So any questions on any of that before I turn it over to Lisa to talk about the financial model?
Mike, this is Chris. Can you explain the federal interest subsidy?
I will let Lisa explain the federal interest subsidy. I could explain it, but then she would have to explain it again. So, Lisa, do you want to talk about that?
And more and more, Mike, just as maybe said, and this might be at least as well, if 18-19 we realized $7 million of investment income, I presume, therefore, do we have to realize investment losses if our portfolio goes down, but we don't sell them? I mean, I'm thinking really about this year. I mean, this year, estimated end of year shows zero in investment line. So maybe you or Lisa could address that.
We actually are assuming a $3 million loss in these numbers for investment earnings for projected for fiscal 20. I did that a couple of weeks ago. Hopefully it won't be quite that bad, but I'll go into more how we get to those numbers in the rest of the presentation. As far as the federal subsidy, that doesn't apply anymore. When we refinanced our debt back in February, we refinanced the 2002 Build America bonds, which had a federal interest subsidy. We basically would apply to the federal government every year on that particular issue to receive a rebate on our interest. But when we refinanced, that went away. So we don't have to worry about that anymore.
Okay.
Okay. So we're to my part, and good afternoon, Finance Chair Ruffin, Chairman Tuttle, and members of the commission. I'm going to go over just some brief comments about our financial picture and the forecast for the future. As you all well know, maintain a comprehensive financial model that we've always used to forecast revenues, expenditures, the capital improvement financings, and our revenue bond coverage. This is a long-term financial model. It's not just an annual look at our budget and expenditures. We look at our capital spending for the next 6-year plan and determine what our needs are. As a reminder, investment income remains in the water and sewer fund. It's available to pay for our debt service. It's available to pay for our capital improvements. As Mike mentioned earlier, in fiscal 19, we ended the year. It was a very good year for the equity markets. We ended at about a $7 million gain. This year, we're looking like we could have a $3 million loss in investments, which has been incorporated into the cash flow projection. As a reminder, our policy for the city has different investment guidelines for each fund. For water and sewer fund, we estimate of our total cash that 50% of it could be capital reserves, and another 50% of that could be invested in the equity market. So we had about 26 million invested in equities at the end of fiscal year 2019. So overall, it's, we're conservative, and it's paid us off in the long run. Third bullet, financial guidelines call for the maintenance of fund balance to be not less than 100% operating and debt service expense. I've got a slide this year that I will show you how we compare to that guideline and what it looks like in the future. And at the end of 2019, we had $143,112,506 in cash and investments. Of that, $35,888,657 was bond proceeds that was remaining from the 2017 bond issuance that we did. Okay, the cash model includes future issuance of water and sewer projects in fiscal 21 and in fiscal 23. Each, I'm projecting about 50 million each. And again, we'll look at a slide that will show you more how we derived at that in a moment. We have been authorized by the state to have 152 million in state loans. Those are a little bit different. If you remember, we draw those down as we expend the monies. So we have not drawn the whole 152 million. 40 million of that is actually for the Nielsen projects, which we haven't even started yet. So our balance now is currently right at 90 million in state revolving loans. Our PAYGO that we project to spend our own money for, which is when you look at those capital reserve additions, that's where we get our PAYGO to fund projects, $30 million. And then just as a reminder, when we issue revenue bonds, there are certain things that we agree to the investor. One of those that's required by the trust agreement is that we will always maintain 1.1 times debt coverage ratio. And our rating agencies, Moody's, Fitch, Standard & Poor's, they prefer that we have debt coverage of 2 times or more for a highly rated credit. And what does that mean? We get a better rating, which means we have better interest cost on the debt when we go to borrow money. Okay, and just so you can understand how the debt coverage ratio is calculated, and also how, so what will be this year, since we are projecting some decrease in our revenues. So our projected revenues right now, conservatively, are 115 million. Our operating expenses, our personnel, and our other operations are right at 48 million. So that leaves us almost $67 million to cover our debt service. So you take the 67.9 and you divide it by, this is the revenue bonded debt service of right at 33 million, and you see we're at 2.03 times estimate for the end of the year. And for the folks who've been on the commission for a while, this has been our goal, and we're here, and so I'm very happy to report that. And if you look at the slide, you can see the green line says, what's our absolute minimum? The blue line is our goal. And then it shows you historically where we've been over time. And if you go all the way back to 2014, you can see we were, about 1.25. We've hit 2 based on what we think is going to happen here in the next couple of years. We could drop down to 1.8, I think, is on our projection. But we project in our model, if we follow the model, that we'll come back over 2 in a couple of years. So I still think that it looks really good. This is our water and sewer debt payments. The light blue line is what we have outstanding and are obligated to pay in revenue bonds to date. If you recall, there is no more variable rate debt. This is all fixed rate debt. So we know exactly what our debt service payments are going to make in the light blue area until we pay off our debt. The red line is our state loans, and that assumes that we draw all the money of 152 million on the state loans. As I said, we've only drawn 90 to date, so this is a conservative look and assumes we're going to use all that money. The third is our future debt, and that assumes that we're going to borrow 50 million in fiscal 21 and 50 million in fiscal 23. And when we get to looking at what our future capital spending is projected to be, in addition to how we plan to fund it, that's based on the plan of not holding back any expenditures. So if it's a conservative look. So as Courtney said earlier, there is some discussion about delaying some of our capital projects or slowing them, and our model is projecting out spending just like we had planned to spend. Okay, so I talked earlier about the financial policy being 1x operating debt service. That's that middle line. So for example, in 2019, our policy says we should have $95 million or almost $96 million. We're at $107 million. Okay, so I'll draw your attention to fiscal 22, and that's really where the effect of 20 and 21 will potentially have not a huge negative impact, but it will have an impact as far as our internal financial policy. We would like to be at 99 million at that point in time, and we'll be at 97. It is a target, so I'm not very concerned about it, but just let you know that we do drop below it in 22 and 23. But as you get on out to 20 or in 24, but you get to 25, we bump back up to over our financial policy in 25 and 26. And this is all based on projections at this point, but this is a plan to how we stay physically sound. And then the bottom line is our revenue bonded debt. You'll see we started at 400 million in 19. We're dropping to 374, and you can see the bumps are where I'm projecting to issue debt again. So the high point is when we do that second issuance in 2023 for 400 and almost 22 million. Next slide. Okay, this is a look just at, and we've talked about appropriation versus capital spending. So Mike Stover completes annually for me how do we think our spending is going to be for the next current year plus 6 years of our capital plan based on what has previously been approved and what we think is going to be approved in the future. So that's what this spending plan is about. So you can see over the next 6 years, we will have spent 300, if we spent according to the plan, we would spend $385,920,000. And then on an annual basis, we look at how are we going to fund that spending. So one of the first things I look at is I look at the state loans, and I pair that up with the project spending, because we know we have the state loan already obligated out there. And then I look at my goal of spending 30 million in PAYGO on an annual basis based on the spending. And then I sort of fill in with revenue bonds and figure out when I might need to issue revenue bonds again. And as you can see, well, I don't have it highlighted here, but we're going to run out of our current revenue bonds in next fiscal year. So we'll need to issue more bonds, and that's where I come up with I need about 50 million in 21 and about 50 million in 23. But if you look at the percentage totals over to the side, I think it's really good information. There was a time when we didn't spend any of our own money on capital funding, and you can see we're almost spending 50% of our PAYGO, of our own money on capital spending. Another third of it's revenue bonds, and then the remainder is our state loan. I think that speaks very highly to the utility and the physical strength of utility and the fact that we can pay for 50% of our projects.
Hey, Lisa, a quick question, please.
Yes, sir.
Back on your 1.0 cash goal and the tight spot in 22 and 23, if I'm remembering.
Correct. Yes.
If we spent 2 or 3 million less in PAYGO those 2 years, would that
yes
be, I mean,
yes
that's so you've got a lot of ammunition there is what I'm
we got lots of variables going on here. I mean, investment
right.
income could be more than I project, revenues could be more than we project. There are many things. So that's why I said yes, it does drop, but I'm really not all that concerned about it.
Cool.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so just to sort of wrap up, what's the impact of no rate increase for fiscal 21 on financial model? We really are in a strong financial position to withstand the reduction in revenues and the monthly cash collections. We're going to have to just watch our revenues on a monthly basis. I don't think anybody really knows what, the ability not to collect some of our revenues, just consumption. I think there are a lot of unknowns, but I think Mike and his staff have been very fiscally responsible in trying to look at a very conservative look at where we think our revenues and expenditures will be in the future. The cash model that I've completed has no increase in 21. I did put an 8% increase in 22 and 23 just to replenish the reserves and meet the financial policy. That's really not a set in stone number. That's just a number that I put in as an analysis for today. We always look at that on an annual basis, but wanted to let you know that's what I've done to complete the financial model. And as I said before, we're going to closely monitor the revenues, expenditures. We're going to update the forecast as we go during the year to see if there are changes and if we need to make tweaks to the model. And I think, is that the last? That's the last slide.
Yeah, that's the last slide. I was just going to ask if there were any other questions for me or Lisa before we turn it back over to Courtney.
Thank you.
All right, Courtney.
Okay, so this is really the last slide, just to wrap up. Just a reminder of the budget calendar. Here we're in April. We've just finished presenting our operating budget. We will need a recommendation from the Finance Committee to move forward with the capital and operating budgets to present to the full commission at the May meeting. And then that gets approved at the May meeting and recommended to the City Council for adoption at their June meeting. So that's where we're at. And if you have any questions, now's a good time. Just remember to unmute yourself if you have any questions.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Do you need a motion?
We do need a motion. I was waiting to see if there are any comments, but if there are no comments, I would certainly appreciate a motion from the committee.
I'll hold my breath for 5 seconds. I make a motion that we adopt a budget as presented.
Do we need a second? Very good. Second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Okay.
Committee.
I do have a question. It didn't have anything to do to change the motion, but I did want to ask. I see the city council, the plan is for the city council to meet in June. Has the city council been meeting virtually during the past month or so?
Yes, and Damon, do you want to follow up on that?
Certainly. Good afternoon, both chairs, all commission members, city staff. Yes, the city council's been meeting virtually, and in fact, this coming Monday, we're going to try our hand at virtual public hearings.
Oh, so this will be the first public hearing, okay? Where would I get the information to watch it if I would want to?
I will send it to you, or for those who may be watching on YouTube, you can go to the city's website, and for the meeting announcement, it'll have the links available.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Well, are there any other questions, comments, concerns before we
I've got a comment.
Okay.
I love this. I love it.
The virtual meetings?
Yes, virtual meetings.
Yeah.
Love it. I
thought you were talking about our presentation.
Well, that too.
That too.
That too. Obviously, that's the case, but you really can cover a lot of ground with a lot of meetings and saves a lot of travel time to do this and do other things. So it's a great deal. Thank you.
Yeah.
To your point, Wesley, I've heard
technology.
Mm-hmm.
To your point, Wesley, I've heard that now that we have gotten used to this, we're probably going to continue it even after we're not sheltering in place.
No.
Talking about the Utilities Commission, I'm just talking about society in general.
Right. Work, yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I want to say that I think the Courtney and the staff have done an outstanding job under the circumstances of putting this thing together and walking us through it. And I think it was an outstanding job. Really appreciate it.
For sure.
Well,
Excellent.
thank you. I think they have too. And as I started out with this meeting, they've been working hard and doing a lot of good hard work too on this, and really appreciate it, Courtney and staff. You guys have done great.
Yep.
Thank
And
you.
I'd also like to say what I thought Wesley was talking about is zero rate increase. I mean, some of the work we've done in the past, I don't know, let's say 5 years, has enabled us to be able to build a little cushion and to be able to stand a really horrific crisis and hopefully give our ratepayers more flexibility than if we had our normal rate increase. So kudos for that as well.
Excellent.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Very good. Any more discussion or comments for the good of the group?
Move we adjourn.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All right, Courtney, if it's okay with you, I believe we'll adjourn.
Yes, it is. Thank
All
you.
those in favor say aye and sign off.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Stay healthy.
Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.